Osrith slept. The night wore on until the early hours of the morning as her body healed. Finolai had explained that most of her injuries were superficial. Her shoulder was deeply cut, and she had said, to his concerned face, that she had had worse. Fergus and Tad had returned much later, inebriated, but Marianne had asked whether she had won the sword. "Where is it?" Fergus asked, looking about him. But she explained briefly that Don Chada had the sword. "No one believed you a girl," Tad had said. "They were behind you, Osrith. Wanted you to win against Bryn, who plays dirty and cheats at cards. But when we saw it was him, we tried to stop you, but—" Tad draped his arm around her, and grinned. "I suppose you did not hear us. We are returning to Doia the day after tomorrow," Tad continued, smoothing his fingers through his fair hair. "I heard him telling me when I was tasting the delights of her lady-in-waiting." "Morag." "The delightful Morag," sighed Tad, "but I was looking for Gormlath." "You never were," Finolai declared, shock in his voice. "It would be death or banishment should a warrior seduce a royal princess." "You can swive her when you get back to Doia," mumbled Fergus, his eyes opening and closing. The young man showed no interest in swiving anything, female, male or beast, and it was strange to hear him talking of it. "Does she sing well?" They laughed again, even Fergus, who probably, by now, was unaware what he was talking about. "Flan wants to stamp his mark on his new territory," Finolai mused, passing Osrith a wooden tankard with some sort of distillation in it, some of it probably water. "That northern coast is rich in stone and fishing, and the Norse have not spread that far." Yet, Osrith contributed, he would press Christianity on the kingdom, as he has done here. Churches, crosses. And another thought broke through her exhaustion, reminding her that 2 moons' worth of days would have passed. Beatha had promised to meet her. "Doia is Christian," protested Tad of his homeland. "Unlike the heathen land you come from." Osrith nodded. "Yes, it is that. Now the Danes control it," she sighed. "And, that'll be the once great kingdom of Northumbria, now returned to Thor and Woden, having been lifted from its paganism by Cuthbert and Comsil." "Ha!" declared Tadg, mostly for Finolai's benefit. "My Hanwedbin comes from the land made Christian by Comsil. Of Doia, you know." He made to punch Finolai on the arm, but missed, falling face first onto the linen ground sheet. "The land that does not believe in the Psyche, because you can't believe in something you know is real," Finolai antagonized. "That's like believing in my sword." "Or my fist," Tad mumbled back, as he sat back up. "Or my ass." Finolai laughed. Then they were all laughing heartily, something they hadn't done since before Findlaith had died. Then, Fergus collapsed onto his woolen blanket, dark red hair hallowed above his head as he began snoring and farting, to the rest of their amusement. Then, Osrith she had closed her eyes, knowing that they were the 4 of them again. Even Domhnall had hinted at his approval of her skill in the fighting circle. It was still dark. Osrith opened her eyes, which made little difference. 3 lumps to one side of her indicated that her 3 warrior compatriots were in the land of the Psyche. And then came another crunch, over the broken twigs fallen from the ash trees surrounding their area of the banqueting hall. Osrith opened her eyes wider, pushing herself up with difficulty on Finolai's fur mantle. Her back was stiff, she couldn't have raised her arm to fight with the Frankish sword even if she had it. What happened next happened so suddenly, Osrith could barely believe it. Hands, enough to abduct one of the sleeping lumps of a warrior without a murmur of protest, came in through the front of the tent. Osrith scrambled to her feet, slowly and with difficulty as muffled shouts ebbed away on the breeze. It was Finolai. He regularly slept by the entrance as it was usually the last place available when he returned most nights, the last of them. Scrambling to her feet she tripped over the lump that was Fergus, bowling out of the tent, then scrambling to her feet. Osrith looked about her, adrenaline hiding pain as her back beat a dull thud of injury. Where had they gone? Morning had not yet broken, but there was enough proto-dawn for her to distinguish 2 figures carrying something between them. She tore towards them, as someone else joined the two. But it was not Finoli. The high-pitched scream told Osrith that it was a woman. Pushing harder, the stiffness her body making running worse, she headed after them, down past the southern Uineal camp, past the middens and onto the path that took her down to the beach where she had met the heathens. Stumbling over horse, Osrith tumbled down the narrow path and catching her head against a tussock of grass. She shook herself, looking out towards the beach. And froze. A ship, oars flat in the water, floated still in the glass-like sea, its sails betraying its straight. Osrith gasped at the air as she hurried herself upright to work out what was going on. A man, vast, broad, hands either side of his protruding stomach, crouched down and investigated the bundle, who swiped and scraped out with her fingers. The captors of this woman stood either side of her as she turned and, predictably, made to run. Osrith crouched lower, as the beginnings of dawn shone light on the slave trader, for that's what he was, his ship crewed by muscle and sinew, eyes belonging to that muscle peering over the taffrail of the vessel. Osrith skirted around another gorse, sand filling her shoes as the woman's captors negotiated with the man. There was clearly a discrepancy over price. The slaver was not happy with the money the woman's captors thought she was worth, and he pulled her to him, hands squeezing breasts, squeezing buttocks, thighs. A slow grin formed on his face. But it was clear the woman wasn't going to be sold as a slave easily. Struggling out of the man's reach, she charged at one of her captors, bending low. The other man caught her around the neck, however, and caught up her arms behind her back. A price was clearly negotiated quickly after this, and the man bundled the woman into the little boat he had clearly come to shore in from the slaver. Another man, perhaps a second in command, stood, 1 foot on the bow of the ship as if anticipating the slave captain's return. The two men, deal done, were now heading up towards the dunes. Osrith tucked in as much as she could, trying to look up to see if she knew the men, but it still was not bright enough for her to make out their features. They were young, though, and trod the dune grass easily. Osrith got to her feet. The slaver was clearly having difficulty with the woman, who was struggling in his arms, and she ran as fast as she could towards the little boat. The slaver slapped her in the face, but the woman remained defiant. She then opened her mouth, as if talking. Osrith raced on, stumbling though the sand was flat from the newly retreating tide. And then drew to a stop. The woman's voice could be heard, on the wind. Ethn. The woman was shouting with all her might. Themi Ethn. I am the Queen of Dara. I am wed to. Another smack in the face lulled the woman, Ethn, as the little boat reached its parent. And then another thought struck Osrith. She knew the name. Don Chada had said that name, Ethn, on the night after Findlaith had been buried. Ignoring the throbbing agony across her shoulders, Osrith drove herself on, running into the waves. From the prow, the other slaver called to his master, and pointed as Osrith drove further and further on. But, it was all for naught. The woman Ethn was bunked over the taffrail, and the little rowing boat was hauled up and into the ship. A wave of the hand from the slaver who had taken the girl, and a shout of instruction down to the slaves caused the oars to rise, and then strike the water, pushing away at it, one side doing more work than the other at first, in order to turn the boat and head it out to sea. Osrith stood, thigh-deep, in the brine as the morning sun shone down on the slave ship and its odious cargo. She had seen slavers before, they were common on the horizon and the far distance over the seascape. Osrith had asked Father Bokul about them, and he had not minced his words. Men should not take other men for property, came his reply. Yet, her and Vlelfric bought slaves from time to time to work in the kitchens. Where would that woman, Ethn, end up? She was feisty, but hunger would wear her out in the end. Was she really Queen of Dara? She must have made that up as a desperate attempt to be freed. And yet, mused Osrith, the identical name to hers had been spoken by Don Chada at Emadka. Would she make up a lie so obvious, considering all had seen Mia marry Flancina 2 days before? As she got to the stubby beach grass, finding the way easily with her feet, Osrith suddenly pulled up sharply. If the bundle those two men had been carrying was that woman Ethn, what had happened to Finoli? She knew he had gone. The waxed linen ground sheet where he had lain, asleep, had still been warm. Osrith hurried back towards the camp, looking up towards the ridge over which Domhnall's warriors' tent was hung. What had happened to Finolai? It did not take Osrith long to find out. As her legs wearied climbing past the midden heaps, a groan came from the dense forest of trees that lay surrounding the bottom section of the banqueting hall field. Further investigation led Osrith to the outline of a cage, strung over a vast branch of a tree. The noise was coming from inside the cage, a puffing noise, as if whatever was in there was trying to catch its breath. It was Finolai. Sun from the east shone onto his face. Have loomed up when he heard Osrith's crunching footsteps. "Go away," hissed Finolai, when Jer realized who it was. "No. What are you doing in there?" "Praying. Or I might as well be." Then Finolai's dry sense of humor failed him and he hung his head. "I am to be sold." "Sold?" "Slavery," Finolai sighed. Osrith trod closer to the cage. It was likely. Unlike prisoners about to be executed, Finolai had not been touched, lest he lose his value. "The slave ship's gone," Osrith asserted, sitting down next to Finolai and recounted her story, about following him, about Ethne, and being Queen of Dara. "It's probably true, if that was her," Finolai said, sadly. "Ethne was Domhnall's sister, and she was, up until Muir married Flansinna, his wife." Osrith felt her mouth fall open. His wife? When he had married Muir? Did she know about this? And what of Domhnall, and Doncharda? Doncharda was probably put in charge of it all, Finolai continued, his voice low. Malruaned and Engus are too young to have carried out such an intrigue. He sighed. Married 5 years and not one pregnancy, let alone a child. And, the line must continue. But, Osrith broke off, considering the outrageous news, Domhnall's sister. It's likely he didn't know. Probably why. I chased after her. I couldn't run fast enough to save her. Then, Osrith looked at Finolai. Why are you here? I've been taken for selling to the slaves, too, the black-haired warrior replied, resignedly. But why? Osrith looked at her friend, demanding an answer. I am what he has paid for the support of the Gales here to regain the Pictish throne. He looked up at Osrith, putting his hands over hers. Domhnall said the political situation was precarious. Flansinna is purifying Christianity, so that God will favor him and the Aryan can unite against the Norse, including those in Alba. But Domhnall will be king. I cannot be the reason he is not. He knows it. Domhnall did this. Now, things were getting unbelievable. The look in their eyes, when she had chanced seen them looking at one another, was pure, was one of love. But Finolai shook his head and looked to the floor. I doubt he knows, and when he finds out it will be too late. But, Osrith felt amazed at this turn. To politics, these kings would sell their own family? Did I not say that to love a royal prince meant death? Then, they should take me, too, Osrith argued, for I have lain many times with Constantine when I swore to Domhnall I would stay chaste. Men, Finolai clarified, but Osrith did not believe it. A royal princess was about to enter a life of poverty and abuse, for this king to further his ambition? No wonder Domhnall had been incandescent. We can dig the floor, Osrith suggested, warming to an idea of escape. She scraped the earth with her hands, which yielded few fragments of earth. It's baked solid. Yule could never burrow through in 1,000 years. Thointh ah. Osrith swore, leaning back onto the cage, searching for an obvious solution. Come on, think, Finolai. But the warrior sank onto the floor. You're giving up. Osrith now turned her anger at his imprisonment and imminent fate back onto her friend. You are letting yourself be sold into slavery for Domhnall? I would die for him, Finolai sighed. But, that was not the answer Osrith would accept. She tried pushing and pulling at the willow, but it would not move. A heavy second ring held the cage onto the floor. A key was needed. But, thought Osrith, from where? Her answer came in the form of a heavy, thick-set guard, thumping his feet across the leaf litter. Finoli shook his head, willing her not to try anything. But Osrith had already pulled herself up into the tree and watched the man wipe his hand across his nose, then the huge gobbet of mucus into the meager food ration Finoli was about to receive. As the man undid the lock, Osrith observed that he had put key inside his jerkin. Good. There was a key, and it was there against his no doubt sweaty, clammy body. Osrith moved so she was directly in line above the man and, when he was about to bend down to lock the cage, allowed gravity to pull her down onto him. The man had no time to struggle, or prorist at her riding on his back. Osrith had taken his head, fingers pushing his eyes into their eye sockets before lifting his hair up with the back of his head, slammed it off the hard-baked earth. Blood seeped out from under his head, and Finoli drew his breath in sharply. But Osrith was already fumbling in the man's leather jerkin for the key, which she found easily and with it clicked the lock open. "Come on," urged Osrith, as Finoli continued to stare at the man. "You have to go, Finoli," she urged, trying to force the heavy man back under the cage. Just when Osrith thought he would never duck under the woven willow cage, Finoli stepped out, clearly upset about his future enslavement, and his love's political future. "He would want you to live," Osrith added, guessing his thoughts. Finoli nodded, but then backed away as Osrith held out Soethibg, her last silver piece. "I cannot take this," Finoli protested. "I won it betting on cups," Osrith lied, pressing her much-needed silver coin against her fingers. Suddenly, Finoli closed his hand around the coin, taking it from Osrith, before herring off into the forest. Osrith watched him go, until he could see him no longer.